Welcome back, everyone. So we have some new people on the call today. We usually do a quick self-intro. So Lingaswamy, would you like to do a quick intro for yourself and maybe how you got to know of this group and what you expect to find here? Okay, maybe we'll do that later then. All right, so let's do a status. People on the call. Igor, if you wanna start us up with the status. Anything new on your side?
Yeah, sorry, nothing new today. So no updates, unfortunately.
Okay, no worries. I don't see Satish on the call, but maybe Hua, do you have any updates on the LMP tool? Did any progress happen with Satish?
No, nothing happened with Satish. Yeah, I'll ping him.
Okay, I know he was blocked on this right now, so there is some urgency to this. If you could ping him, then that's fine. Otherwise, if you need me to ping him, I can do that as well.
Okay, I'll ping him.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Giovanni. Anything? Any updates you want to share with the Rust API? Any status?
Yeah, we are moving forward and we are in a good status at the moment. So I hope I could submit something to the people here in a few weeks. Let's see.
Got it. Thank you, Giovanni. And Vincent, do you wanna give us a debrief of your visits last week?
Yeah, definitely. I went to visit some of our ODMs, our design manufacturers, and presented the OCP test and validation intent. So I actually reused the slides that we had put together for the summit last year, which are a great way to get reintroduced to it. So for anybody new on this call who may not have seen that, just let us know. We can point you to it. It's on the it's widely available online through OCP, but if you're having a problem finding it, let us know. It's a great deck to reintroduce the project. So we shared that. We shared examples of diagnostics and the output format, and they are very motivated. Definitely understood the position that this presents, the value add to them and to their customers in aligning sort of the workloads to run validation from labs to manufacturing to data center, and sort of this alignment allowing everybody to move faster and make better sense of the hardware quality. So we should be expecting contributions coming from the design manufacturer shops. How that's going to actually translate remains to be sort of worked out, because they are kind of building the hardware, whereas this community has mostly been meeting on the side of the demand, sort of the hyperscaler and enterprise community. But we should be expecting that alignment to come forward pretty soon. So that's in a nutshell. It is going to take a few weeks, maybe a few months to materialize until we figure out who are going to be the players participating in the discussion. But it was overall a very good visit, very good discussion around this project.
Thank you for that update, Vincent, and thanks for holding our flag in those discussions there. Do you foresee at this point any technical blockers that may appear in the following weeks or during this engagement. Like, one of the things that first comes to my mind is the language in which these diacs would be written, right?
Yeah, that did come up in some of the discussions around the prevalent languages. It does appear Python is a pretty robust base of a language for most of the companies and the folks I spoke with. So I do anticipate the native library to be the kind of go-to. We did talk to some validation parts of the design manufacturer houses and their manufacturing center and their design folks. I think in some areas, obviously the C++ bindings or libraries will make sense, but largely Python was the prevalent language. Rust did come up in discussion, but I don't think that I was able to sense a very strong engagement on Rust overall at this moment from that community. On the technical blocker, I think, yeah, there is expertise and knowledge of GitHub in general, but there may need to be a sort of reinforcement of the best practices of the coding standards, of how to contribute, how to name things, how to abstract and generalize a diagnostic. I think one of the points that is going to take some time, and that's regardless of whether it's the design manufacturers or not, is what should be the scope of a diagnostic, right? Is it going to be somebody's kind of unit test of a piece of hardware, whether it is a fan speed check or a particular PCI lane test, as opposed to a system integration, more large scale component level tests, such as what FIO, iPerf, or Stress App Test have done to the community. I think that needs more discussion and is going to be one of the technical hurdles we'll have to overcome, because otherwise we may be seeing basically a series of very small kind of hardware unit test type diagnostic, which could kind of flood the community in a way that may or may not be bad, but I think we need discussion around that.
Yeah.
Marcus. Yeah.
I have a follow-up for that, but go ahead, Marcus.
No, if you go ahead. I'll ask later.
Okay. So I'm thinking at that point, it may be of value to actually have some interactive workshop with all of these people that may be interested, because okay, we have some documentation. It could be a lot better, but there's a lot of variability in what the documentation actually needs to cover. So you mentioned like GitHub. Maybe we're gonna go into recommendation guidelines in various ways that aren't captured by any docs that we have right now. Out of this workshop, this discussion, we may actually get some docs written, or it would be useful on its own. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So I don't know if it's going to be this time slot or a separate one, which is not recorded, so like more approachable to people. We'll see. Just an idea to think about.
I think before opening up to Marcos, one thing that obviously comes up in these forums is if you take a step back and you look at sort of the industry sort of prevalent big component level test framework, not test executive, but thinking of like FIO as a good example, or iPerf as a utility, or Stress App Test, Memtest, etc. They are written by typically software engineers that have taken a lot of abstraction of the hardware and put a lot of thought into how to generalize the topology of the components and write a very flexible sort of stress tester for these components. this is in contrast with a lot of how the application of test validation happens in practice and in a lot of these shops, where it's going to be very platform or product specific, with derivations of sort of these test applications. And so if we're setting the bar at wanting to wrap diagnostics for things like FIO or memtest, that's one thing. But if we're looking at contributions for platform-specific and product-specific level for the subcomponents, then we're going to get something different. And I don't think we've had enough of that discussion to attract the contributions in the open from those shops. So I agree with you, Adrian, that we need to refine and sort of double click on that. We've had a good alignment on the high level wrappers, stress app test, mem test, etc., but not on the double click to those.
So here's the thing. I don't think we should be prescriptive to the extent of saying, okay, your diag needs to cover all of these possible use cases. I think anyone should be enabled to run and to write their own diagnostic, as long as it satisfies the output criteria, right? The output spec. And some criteria of maintainability and a couple of things that kind of come with the whole semantic of having a diag. For the ones, the couple of repos that we have as maintained by the group here, these have had the semantic of being non-differentiating, right? So that's why you kind of see this thing of, okay, we're testing the CPU, but we're not testing a particular CPU or some particular aspect of the hardware, which means that you need more of the software development skills to be able to make this more abstract layering and all of that discussion. I think we need to have some discussion on identifying the roles. I don't think this is clear to everyone. Even in this group right now, I don't think this is clear enough to identify, domain experts and test writers, test executors, all of the roles that appear in this kind of testing. And at that point, we can say, okay, publish your diag. It can only select, a very limited set of capabilities or whatever. But as long as you maintain it and it satisfies these criteria, then it is obviously welcome, and other people may use it as well.
Yep.
Marcos?
Oh yeah, we may have lost Marcos for a minute.
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Marcos.
Just left the elevator. Sorry. So I was thinking maybe we can think about with the sort of engagement we want with manufacturers as an ODM partners, it kind of as a ladder, because there's benefits for them and there's benefits for their customers. But I think, for example, step one is obviously whatever frameworks you have to run diags, adding support for the ability to inject or to execute an OCP diag. It adds huge value and is like kind of like the precursor for them to do any sort of contribution. So looking at how do we help with that, so that as more diagnostics come available, because there's a great sales pitch there of just do this work once and then everything else just plugs in. And then looking at sort of in that sense, for me as a customer, getting a data completeness aspect of an OCP diag, where I know kind of what data is coming out. And so when I request, hey, can you add some coverage for this this little apparatus or something. If even if it's not an open sourced output, making it in such a way that, oh, this is, if you please do it in this OCP diag format, like we now have a way for, oh, that thing you wrote, yeah, I can now ingest it and run it in my lab with my framework, equally valid, and be able to help debug or look at things or potentially reuse it. So that was a kind of my thought on progression, because the idea of having some very large scale reusable across many environments coming from a manufacturer who's very focused on shipping this product now that they're under a deadline, I think we should balance expectations there of what sort of contributions to be a member of this OCP community. That shouldn't necessarily mean that you're producing stuff upstream unless it really makes sense. But being part of the user base also increases the value that we bring.
So I'll try to link that a bit with what I was saying with the roles. I don't think we should have, generally speaking, high skill requirements in roles that do not apply for the specific contributors. So, for example, to make this more clear, if we're talking to a domain expert which happens to be in hardware engineering and they know how the hardware works in detail, I don't think it is reasonable to ask that person also writes very abstract and flexible and all of these qualities software package to cover that the testing done in the diag, right? I think we would need to accept these contributions and also have some sort of process in place with roles that are more software oriented that can help with either consolidating these code bases or refactoring or whatever is needed to make them more palatable for the public at large. So I know that's not an easy thing to do, and I've seen a lot of circumstances where this didn't work very well. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a necessity that we'll need to handle. Okay, and in the meantime, oh, the new person dropped. Okay, I was gonna try to ask for an intro again. Let me change topics quickly a bit because I see Yang joined the call. Yang, we're kind of in the status section of the call. Do you have any updates you want to share?
No, not for me. Thank you, Adrian.
Right,
but
cool.
did we start the GitHub discussion that we talked in previous 2 or 3 meetings?
Which one specifically? There's a couple of them.
For the definition of the test configurations, right? How to define how many loops and the order in which you define tests.
Oh, the sequencing aggregation topic, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Did we start on that?
I don't think we did. Giovanni, do we have any update on that work?
Not yet, sorry.
Okay, so
okay.
I guess
Yeah,
that answers your.
Yeah. Just as an update, virtual client also supported definition from YAML. Previously, it was only JSON. Now we support JSON and YAML. So while we are making this change, if this group decides on a schema, we can also look into it. Or otherwise, maybe we can recommend a schema. Because we already have one that we're using.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask you, Giovanni, maybe on this topic. Do you have any plans on continuing this discussion? Because I know it can get quite hairy to define all of these things.
Yeah, exactly. But there is a use case internally that could be interesting to have under this topic. So yes, I only just need a little bit more of time because it was a busy weeks, and I could not get deep into that topic. But yes, I'm planning to continue on that.
Okay, so in that case, Yang, does that sound okay to you? Like
Yeah, of course.
continue getting something to work, at least some POC, which. So what I'm thinking, you know, off the top of my head right now, this isn't. Don't take this with a grain of salt, as it were. I'm thinking that if we do start working on this kind of specification in how you aggregate maybe workloads and tests and reporters, monitors, whatever, like in the same schema, it wouldn't necessarily be tied to virtual clients. Maybe we can extract logic from there and or refactor it in a way that it will be compliant with this spec that would be developed. But the point is, the way I'm seeing it is it kind of sits on its own. Does that work for you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
If you're asking me, no.
In general, it's perfect. Sit alone. Our virtual client's a runtime platform itself. So most of the things that run sit alone, and it's meant to be an aggregator of capabilities and feature sets. And so I think it's perfectly fine if there's tool sets do things in different ways. It's perfectly fine. We don't need. It's not necessary for things to work one way or the other. So I would definitely say it's certainly useful. I mean, flip side, coming the other way around, some of the diags that we're talking about here, virtual client running them themselves is also, I think, very interesting from our perspective and useful.
I see. Thanks, Brian. So the point I was making is maybe a better perspective on this is seeing it as extracting a spec out of what virtual client is doing right now, because you already have like this language, this DSL to some extent to specify what the workloads are and what the monitors are, right? But if we can take this out as an entity on its own, a spec on its own, and enhance it with a couple more things, that could be maybe enhanced back into VC, but also can sit on its own as a agnostic spec, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, cool. So I guess we'll get back on this following weeks whenever Giovanni gets a bit more time, and if you wanna, I think you have a channel to discuss this with Yang already, right, Giovanni?
We had a thread on the emails, so yes, we could revive that thread.
Okay. So we'll get back on this. Cool. In the meantime, there's a couple more items on the agenda, but the respective people aren't here. I have a question for Vincent. So you had an action item, Vincent, a while ago with invite Eleanor to present in early 2024 I don't remember exactly what this was about. Do you know?
Yeah, this was followed up internally here at Meta. So this was about a unified sort of database of diagnostic faults or failures, so that we have a little bit like the zero-day community in the security world, visibility into faults that occur on components. Eleanor and Gotham both are motivated and were interested. This goes just before we went on the year-end break, but have not re-engaged. So it's a good reminder to ping them. They had shown interest in contributing here, and I can follow up with them, Adrian. I know they had told me they needed some time to mature their approach, and then they would be ready to present. So I'll
There
follow up.
isn't, Vincent, there isn't anything ready this week anyway. I was talking to Eleanor yesterday.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate the update.
Thanks, Vincent. So yeah, I've been I remember being in some discussion about that as well, and I think one of the main criteria right now is defining the qualities or coordinates of particular diags. And I know a couple of people on this call are thinking about that as well. So for example, stuff like, okay, is this diag going to run for 30 seconds, for 5 minutes, for 30 minutes? Is it going to be only read-only? Is it destructive? Like a bunch of such things. And then we can talk about what the actual repository is. I don't know if there's anything available on that right now in terms of the repository of such information. Do you know if Eleanor had something in mind with this, or was it just a starting discussion?
I don't know actually what the extent of I don't think there's a schema. I at this point I think it was a lot more aligned with some other project she was working on. Karen, do you have any more insight on the scope?
I have a meeting with her in half an hour after this call, so I'll have more information then. You can put an action for me for next week, Adrian.
Okay.
Okay. So I can do that, although I would thank you again, Karen, for taking notes for the call.
I'll put an action for myself for next
So that's what I was hinting at, yes.
Yeah, I was talking to her yesterday morning and I didn't get a feel that it was far enough along to have a discussion in this forum, but I can follow up again. I can check with her.
All right, yeah, I think that's good. Okay, so in that case, I am out of items for the agenda right now. We have around 20-ish minutes left if anyone wants to raise anything up for discussion in this group. If not, I can reopen the topic of running steps in parallel, maybe. I don't know if that was concluded a couple of weeks ago.
That'd be a good topic, Adrian. I'd be interested.
Okay. So I mean, feel free to interrupt me. The last thing I remember, so I was proposing that we should have some way of encoding when steps have been run sequentially or in parallel in the output of the spec. Right now, I don't think it is mandated in any way how you execute the steps. Like this was a discussion that came up in the LMT tool design. And the thing is, in my opinion, you need to be able, when you read an output from a diagnostic, you need to be able to piece back together what happened in the diag, right? So in my mind, the steps are essentially sequential. However, as I said, the spec doesn't say they are sequential. So you could also arguably run them in parallel, and maybe you can make some sort of inference based on the timestamps that they have run in parallel or some combination of sequential and parallel. So what I was proposing to maybe clarify this a bit is have another sort of container type in the output, which says, okay, up to this point, everything was run sequentially, and inside this container, like we have a bunch of steps that will be run in parallel. And then you take this whole group and insert it in the sequential list of steps as per the test run. So this is one option. The other option, as I was saying, is kind of make this inference out of the timestamps. And say, because you have timestamps in both when the step starts and when the step ends. So I can also see this visualization in my head, maybe like a Gantt chart, where you don't have anything explicitly telling you that the steps were run in parallel or sequential, but you can look at a graphical representation of the test run and get an idea of what happened. And I don't know how useful this information is at the end of the day. So that's maybe a question that is unanswered for me. I don't know if you have any opinion on this, Vincent, because you work with all of this stuff in manufacturing, right? With Fava. Do you think it would be useful to explicitly have the information of this group was run in parallel, these steps were run sequentially in the output, or would it be sufficient to only look like at a Gantt type of diagram where you see, okay, this step started here and then ended here?
So I mean, some of this is just going to be my opinion based on what I've seen. So I also welcome others' input. Obviously, there's a rich literature and background on everything involving ordering, semantics, going back to great debates on order dictionaries in Python and why you know unit tests per se should not have dependencies between themselves. But that said, I think when it comes to, if you take it at an extreme, sort of concepts of gang scheduling for operations like scatter gather, and if we look at extreme cases of tests that would be more complex than sort of sequential testing, if we put that in the scope of what we're trying to do here, then to support the semantics you're talking about, Adrian, yeah, we would need to be able to define barrier semantics between groups of steps. The question then, the unknown to me is, does this really present a lot of value to the community, right? Because I think the literature on how to sequence this exists. I don't think we would be innovating in the way we support that. It's more of a question of does it present value? And whether somebody would put the complexity of scheduling multiple steps within one step and doing the parallelism handled within that step, or to put that semantic at the level of the diag is sort of, I think, the question you're asking, right? And
I mean, the question I'm asking is exactly if it has value. That's why I'm asking you specifically in this case, and I'm gonna ask Marcus in a second as well. But from a debuggability perspective or usability, as a client of the diag, right? Is it useful to have this sort of visualization or insight into how the diagnostic executed the steps?
I want to give I'm having a very similar related discussion internally, and my answer there was favoring the beautiful KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid. So my short answer is, if we can keep it simpler, it is going to be more maintainable. So even though I'm torn a little bit on this, because there is a need for managing this level of parallelism, but in my view, it can be handled within a step. And so I would say it is a kind of complexity I would not push for at this moment. So I would say not yet.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Vincent. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, in general, either the step itself is doing things, and if it deems to be valuable in parallel, I think timestamps are enough for us. And in our execution framework is executing the diags in parallel and consuming and handling the output through its various pipes. So I tend to think, so long as the output is identified by step and order, and which step does this artifact belong to, and those are indexed based on when they were launched, I think that's sufficient in most of the cases I can think of.
So from a debuggability standpoint, if I understand it correctly, you say it would be sufficient to just see when something started and ended in terms of the steps, to be able to figure out why something failed or how it failed.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to go through use cases in my head because I work better that way. But so one thing that we do is like we tend to have a flag for things that where we've chosen to parallelize something for as a time optimization versus just something that inherently needs to execute in parallel. And when thinking through that use case, having to basically parse two different types of output based off if I ran it parallel versus sequential is kind of, it seems not great on the other side. So, but inherently, they're just by having the output come out in whatever order it's being produced, so long as it's indexed back to where it belongs, I think that's sufficient. That's the parser should be able to handle that. From a debuggability perspective, I mean, this is just the nature of the beast. So,
okay. Juan, would you mind explaining a bit the discussion that we had on your use case in the LMP tool, where you need to run all of those margining at all of the RX endpoints at the same time in parallel, and maybe that would be useful for the discussion here.
Yeah, in my case, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. In my case, it's all about saving the time, okay? Because test time is money. So we do like various things and lanes in parallel. And each link lane has its own output results. It's considered as a test step. well, or no, well, since we decide test steps that are in parallel, are in sequential, we cannot use test step to encapsulate this concept of run each lane and link in parallel, because they can be running sequentially, but that costs a lot more time. I think that was the origin of this decision.
Okay, so this actually qualifies as an optimization here.
Yes, and I think my opinion that this is getting into the how the diag executes. Yeah, I agree. It's simple, and so that it can be flexible and not limiting how diag has to follow certain, boundaries to execute whatever they decide.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, I think what Hua just said around a lot of what we're talking about is really has to do with how the diag is architected. I think obviously what makes this discussion need more context is what's the scope of the test step, and does it have exclusive access to the resources under test, right? Because if you're executing test steps in parallel and there are interdependencies between steps that interfere with each other, then you're basically dirtying your diagnostic and evaluation of what you're after. So there is a lot of craft in the diag that calls for what is the scope of a step itself and the interdependencies between a step. So to parallelize steps, to say these steps can be run after these steps with particular conditions, all this adds a lot of programming logic, so to speak, conditionals and looping potentially. And this is kind of why I said best to keep the programming logic to the program itself and design the diagnostic in a way that is easier to maintain, so that the step itself is designed with the parallelism in mind that handles the complexity, rather than push that at the level of the at a higher level semantic for the diag. But the nuance that Hua is talking about is definitely not lost. Like clearly the test step and test time as an efficiency has to be a first principle in designing diagnostic. And so the question is, what's the scope and what are the dependencies between the steps? And at that point, if there is no dependency whatsoever, then obviously somebody should be able to run to start the steps separately. But one could argue, why not at that point have one step that basically parallelizes the operation? Back to you, Adrian.
So I think this is a very good perspective that you just described, Vincent. And it convinces me that on top of, like, if you add to what you said, the discussion on debuggability and that it is sufficient as it is right now, it convinces me that we don't actually need to add anything else to the spec as it is and leave this decision to the test, where we have two cases, right? To the diag, where we have two cases. One is you have mandatory parallelism because you need to do multiple things at the same time. And arguably, you can say that is one single step, and you need to figure out how you actually name the measurements and all of that. Or you want to optimize for time, in which case the only criteria at that point is whether your steps have dependencies or they need mutexes or critical sections or whatever. So I think that's a very good perspective. And I think the place for this is in the how to write a diag guidance doc that has been discussed, a couple of times. And we can collate all of these ideas there. For the time being, what I've been hearing as an answer to my question here, and let me know if you agree, is that we are not gonna mandate anything in the output spec around this right now. Okay, cool. So that's gonna be the conclusion of this discussion. Thank you for that. And we are kind of out of time for today. So if there's nothing else, I'm gonna thank everyone for joining today, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.